This is a journey across a magnificent continent. It's a journey through space and time. Along the way, we discover the traces of ancient oceans and unearth the remains of tropical rainforests way up high in the mountains. Dinosaurs join us as traveling companions. We meet up with Neanderthals and are on hand to witness a cosmic accident that came close to obliterating everything. We encounter hunters and the hunted, and join Europe on its long journey around our planet. A 100 years ago, people were already aware of certain mysterious ancient animals. Again and again, evidence of a much earlier Germany surfaced, a place inhabited by strange creatures. This was just such a find from those prehistoric times. Bone from a legendary animal. The age of the dinosaur had dawned. They would now call the shots for the next 150 million years. Compared to its later relations, the Plateosaurus was a featherweight. Yet this herbivore was still too heavy for the damp, muddy ground of the swamplands that had spread over the area bit by bit. The thick, gooey silt swallowed them up like quicksand. In modern times, so many of the longnecks were unearthed here that they were nicknamed Swabian lintworms after the local region. These creatures marked the beginning of the story of the dinosaurs. The bone was only the tip of the iceberg. But let's first take a big step back. Young Earth was still a glowing ball of fire. No sign yet of our blue planet. Little by little, the red-hot Earth cooled down. Rivers, lakes, and oceans appeared. At the time, the primeval precursor of Europe was rising up from the sea. The continent lay thousands of kilometers farther south, at the equator. Nowadays, this distant era is known as the Carbon or Coal Age. Back then, there was a strange atmosphere in the forest. Birds did not yet exist. The climate was hot and humid. There was a surplus of oxygen. Higher, further, longer. The fern trees grew to heights up to 20 meters. Prehistoric giant centipedes could reach lengths of up to 2 meters. Chordates were the first vertebrates to set foot on terra firma. Within just a few million years, these amphibians had developed legs and lungs. And for the first time, animals took to the air. Giant dragonflies patrolled from above, with 4 individually controllable wings. Like their modern ancestors, they were high-precision hunters. The ancient tropical forests produced enormous amounts of oxygen. One thunderclap was enough to cause the explosive air mixture to combust. At this stage, Europe was situated at the intersection of 2 vast landmasses. The collision of the two gave rise to a mountain range that could have been as high as the modern-day Alps, if it hadn't begun to crumble as soon as it had formed. The forest swamplands were buried beneath the debris of the mountains. Forests repeatedly grew up, only to be flooded once again by the ocean waters and covered with sand and rocky debris, a process that took millions of years. Cut off from oxygen, the plants didn't rot. First, they became peat, then lignite or brown coal, and finally, black coal. The run-up to modern coal mining began 700 years ago in England. On the surface at first, then, in pursuit of the deeper layers, operations went underground. The energy originally stored in the plants was once again brought to light. The great hunger for energy literally undermined the coal mining towns. The ground below was soon crisscrossed with mine shafts and passageways. Meanwhile, above ground, coal-fired power plants were being built. These installations convert fossil combustibles into energy, the stuff that growth and progress is made of. On the coal mine slag heaps, the primeval forest from down below once again becomes visible. Its remains can be seen in the fine outlines that the giant specimens have left behind in the coal strata. The huge fern trees have been immortalized in stone, as well as giant centipedes. The trunks of 40-meter-tall sigillaria trees have also made their mark. So too the dragonflies, which, apart from their huge size, are hardly distinguishable from today's version. The blueprint of the magnificent dragonfly has hardly changed in millions of years. During growth, the young insect repeatedly casts off its extremely lightweight yet durable chitinous exoskeleton. Beneath this disposable armor, its body is divided into soft segments, After the last shedding, it finally spreads its wings. The dragonfly has reached maturity. The descendants of the caudate have not reinvented themselves either. They still spend their childhood in the water, breathing through gills. Later on, they grow legs and lungs. Only then can they go on land. It's almost like watching evolution in fast motion. In prehistoric Central Europe, a massive mountain range once stood here, where now only dwarves remain. Erosion has worn the Coal Age mountain range down to the ground. As the peaks eroded, their debris filled the valleys. What remains are the low mountain ranges of southern, eastern, and western Europe, the Sudides, the Rhenish Massif, and the Ardennes. Water often collected in the clay containing watertight strata of the valley floors, creating lakes. Looking at the green landscape of today, it's hard to imagine that a primordial ocean once sloshed here. The Zechstein Sea covered a large part of the European continent, from today's Baltic states, across Poland, and all the way to the Netherlands. There was still no sign that a disaster of incomparable proportions would occur in the post-Carbon Age era. Temperatures on land were scorching. Though they were left high and dry, the amphibians didn't go extinct. Those that escaped the arid land into the water lived on and continued to adapt. Rain clouds that developed out at sea rarely reached the interior of the landmass. Without rain, vast desert regions came into being. With skin and eggs that are resistant to evaporation, the reptiles now had a decisive advantage in the hot desert climate. Over a period of 150 million years, mountain ranges were ground down, flooded by the ocean, then left to dry out again. What remained was a landscape of dusty valleys cut through with deep rivers and streams. Mud skippers found their own ingenious way of gaining solid ground. Instead of lungs, they developed gill chambers, which they fill with water that they repeatedly enrich with oxygen by gasping for air. Mud skippers are not the link between fish and the four-legged creatures on land. Rather, they are proof that for almost every challenge, there are several solutions. It can take hundreds of millions of years for a given animal to make the transition from water to land. Crabs have also made the leap. At low tide, they search the sand for food. As diverse and ingenious as plant and animal adaptations may be, nature is nevertheless repeatedly sent back to the drawing board. By the end of the Permian period, 80% of all animal species on land and in the sea had gone extinct. It is highly probable that a series of volcanic eruptions triggered their demise. The climate descended into chaos. Algae blooms and oxygen-eating bacteria created death zones in the oceans, poisoning all marine life. Throughout the Earth's history, mass die-offs of this kind have repeatedly led to the loss of entire animal groups. Even today, evidence of the prehistoric deserts is still omnipresent. In the Palatinate Forest on the Franco-German border, sand and clay deposits have piled up to form 400-meter thick layers. Once, the colorful sandstone also filled all the valleys, covering the entire Palatinate Forest. But wind and water have since eroded a major portion of the highly porous sedimentary stone, creating bizarre rock formations. And the Palatinate Forest isn't the only one in Europe that's changed. Across the continent, the giant fern trees have been replaced by other species: spruce, beech, oak, and pine. At first glance, this sea of trees seems empty and monotone, yet it's actually full of life and surprises. In the south of the continent, Mediterranean pine forests carpet the land. In Central and Eastern Europe, it's beech. And in the north, the taiga takes over. But though these forests might seem untouched, they ceased being real wilderness a very long time ago. Here, forestry and modern hunting shape the face of nature. White stork is one of the original inhabitants of the alluvial forests. Initially a tree breeder, the birds first took to the rooftops and chimneys when human beings began to shape the landscape. And yet, since time immemorial, the forest has remained an enchanted place, shrouded in mystery. The deep, dark woods are a primary source of legends and fairy tales. At night, we can still feel the spirit of the primeval forest. In some places, however, the dream of the ancient forest has become a nightmare. For centuries, the prehistoric carbon stored in the Carbon Age forests has been rising into the atmosphere from smokestacks and chimneys, fueling climate change as well as industry. But rows of spruce have also been planted at some spots, creating fragile forest plantations. Powerful winter storm, however, sweeping through here and pulling up trees by the roots can often devastate whole woodland areas. When such natural disasters strike, we can only look on helplessly as years of reforestation efforts are toppled. In the Bavarian Forest National Park, they have established what are called forest cells, designated areas where fallen trees are left untouched. The forest is purposely left to its own devices. Here, it's open season for pests. The voracious bark beetle can go about its destructive work undisturbed. The beetles lay their eggs in the wood, and when they hatch, the gluttony begins. Like a biblical plague, the insects ravage the spruce forest. But every ending bears the seeds of a new beginning. However, unintentionally, the pernicious pest actually helps give birth to a new, wilder, and more colorful world. Fungi contribute by decomposing the dying timber to create the virgin forest of the future. With the naked eye, we can't even see the growth of mushrooms that shoot up from the ground virtually overnight. So it is all the more difficult to comprehend the slow pace at which life turns to stone. What looks like a standstill is in fact a state of constant change. Entire continents migrate, animal and plant species vanish, and new ones appear. But in our perception, the time spans are so enormous that we can only guess at the extent of the changes. The events of millennia can be compressed into just a few centimeters of stone. At a rock quarry in Bavaria, evidence of prehistory is revealed. As the layers are excavated, silent witnesses from a bygone age repeatedly come forward. Back then, the region rested at the edge of a sea with flat lagoons along the shoreline. Underwater, coral reefs lined the coast. But above the waterline, things were getting restless. Welcome to Europe's Jurassic Park. In the Jurassic period, the dinosaurs had the run of the planet. Skillful flyers, quick hunters, and armored giants, they conquered almost every niche, every habitat. On the islands, which are mountains today, live speedy predatory dinos, like this Compsognathus, who like to eat his smaller relations. This savage age gave birth to a strange creature with clawed fingers and a long, bony tail, Archaeopteryx. The first evidence of Archaeopteryx was discovered in 1860 in a chalk quarry in the little Bavarian town of Solnhofen. A feather. Soon the first fossilized skeleton was found, a feathered dinosaur. A bird? The finds gave rise to new questions. Charles Darwin had just published his theory on the origin of species. Soon the fossil was caught in an evolutionary tug-of-war. One camp saw it as evidence that birds came from dinosaurs. For others, it was an exotic anomaly, but definitely not a link between species. They were wrong. Every layer of Solnhofen limestone could bring a new fossil to light and cause a new stir. A discovery no one had reckoned with. Archaeopteryx wasn't the first dino to wear feathers. But if the little predatory dinosaur's plumage wasn't airworthy, why did they have it? Nowadays, reptiles are cold-blooded. They sunbathe to store up warmth. Dinosaurs were believed to do the same, but the Jurassic creatures left nothing more than stone to go by. But the stone has tales to tell, if you know how to extract them. Sometimes very fine structures are preserved deep within the fossils. At Bonn University, researchers are looking at these microstructures. In the bones of the big herbivore dinosaurs, the scientists have discovered growth rings, similar to those of trees. The core samples from the bones show that in many dinosaurs, the rings are spaced at large intervals. They must have grown quickly, as only warm-blooded creatures do. And so, history must now once again be rewritten. At least several species of dinosaur had little in common with modern reptiles. Feathered, two-legged dinos that warm their eggs with their bodies and feed their young. The similarity is no coincidence. The golden eagle, here on the lookout for prey, is a descendant of the dinosaur. Likewise, blackbird and sparrow. The eagle's habitat looks wizened, weather-beaten, full of wrinkles, as old as can be. The appearance is deceptive. The Alps are a relatively young mountain range that a mere 200 million years ago was still underwater. Today, traces of the former ocean are still encased in the alpine Dachstein limestone. The mysterious imprints in the Dachstein Massif long posed puzzling questions. These are the descendants of the inhabitants of a warm ocean, from which the Alps had yet to rise up. Back then, much of the alpine region still looked like a tropical underwater seascape. In the south, a deep trench separated the African and European continents. The sea filled this divide, and the beaches were lined with reefs up to 1,000 meters tall. The smaller inhabitants of this sea had to beware of marine dinosaurs. Even in the dark, the alpine reef was not a safe place. Nowadays, that sea lies above the clouds. The seabed crumpled up into a mountain range. Once 1,000 kilometers across, it was pushed together like a concertina and is now just 100 kilometers wide. The craggy mountain landscape is the result of a collision of the two continents. Here, Africa pressed from the south against Europe. Unbelievably slowly, the Earth's crust splintered, crumbled, and piled up in layers. And so, from the bottom of an ancient ocean, the chalk Alps grew to great heights. The ancient seabed has turned to rock cliff, from which water comes crashing down in free fall. The constant force of the water wears the mountain away again, bit by bit. Daddy Longlegs, or harvestmen, have survived for millions of years and are eyewitnesses to these changes. Now, many species are under threat. Human beings are encroaching on their habitats. The underwater world of the alpine lakes is no less mysterious than the prehistoric oceans. Here, too, evolution has come up with a highly inventive survival strategy. These clear but nutrient-poor lakes are home to the bladderwort. This ancient aquatic plant has a special way of meeting its dietary needs. To get enough nitrogen, the bladderwort supplements its diet with little crabs and worms. The tiny animals are trapped and then slowly digested in the bladder of the carnivorous plant. In the dinosaur age, the prehistoric precursor of the pike could also be found chasing through the waters. "600 meters above today's sea level lies the Königssee. Here the pike and the bladderwort hunt along the remains of coral banks and reefs that were lifted up to altitudes far above the timberline. In just a few million years, the habitat has been transformed, and with it, the animal and plant kingdoms. Living at an altitude of 1,000 meters, the marmot is perfectly adapted for the alpine climate. Unlike some other mammals, marmots are unable to pant to cool their bodies down. In a warmer climate, they would not survive the rigors of the constant turf wars. But how do species develop? How does evolution get down to business? While the Alps slowly rose up, a new and colorful revolution began. Flowering plants came to be, and with them, insects, some of them specially adapted to a single type of flower. If one did not exist, the other could not survive. The insects are attracted to the nutrition, and by pollinating the buds, they, in turn, ensure the creation of the next generation of flowering plants. No one yet knows exactly how this interplay of mutual adaptation all began. It's a rugged world up here. The high mountain habitat is particularly harsh. With every meter of altitude, the temperature drops and the diversity of plant life decreases. But the plants that do manage to survive up here, despite extremes of cold, sun, and aridity, are true specialists. In this inhospitable realm, where almost no tree species can exist today, the Swiss pine thrives. They take their time growing and can live for up to 1,000 years. With their sinuous trunks and tough wood, they defy the storms and icy winds that often haunt these heights. The fate of the nutcracker is inextricably linked to that of the pines. Year for year, this little feathered descendant of the dinosaur painstakingly gathers pine cones. In the fall, a single bird stows his stash in up to 6,000 hiding places. When winter comes, it returns to its storehouses. It can remember where most of them are, but not all. Many of the seeds in the forgotten caches sprout in spring, allowing new trees to grow. So the nutcracker doesn't just feed at the bountiful table of the Swiss pine. It also ensures the species' continued existence. A delicate balance of nature at the edge of the timberline. What was once the ocean floor is now the preserve of acrobats. Under the watchful eye of the eagle, the young chamois blaze new trails. But as skillful as they are at climbing, falling rock and avalanches repeatedly take their toll, especially on the kids. The eagles are immediately on the scene. Ibex and chamois risk their daredevil stunts on the precipitous rocky mountainsides in search of an essential substance, salt. On the journey of the continent northwards from the equator, the sun dried out the shallow seas, turning them to salt deserts. The Permian period oceans also left their traces here in the far south of Germany. Today, those salt strata traverse the rock of the Berchtesgaden Alps. The salt rock veins extend kilometers deep into the mountains, and at some spots are up to 1,000 meters thick. As the Alps began to elevate, the salt deposits too were lifted out of the depths, becoming deformed as they were displaced. Their patterns clearly delineate the uplift of the mountain range. Salt has been extracted in Berchtesgaden for almost 500 years. The drills follow the salt veins in the mountain. From the tunnels, mine shafts extend deep down into the salt rock. The mountain water itself does the actual extraction, washing the salt out of the stone. The brine is almost as salty as the water of the Dead Sea. The ancient cycle repeats itself. Water evaporates and precious salt remains. Hundreds of millions of years have left their mark in the rocks, giving Europe its ever-changing appearance. During this time, the Alps have grown to become a massive mountain range. Their peaks are the highest point of today's Europe. And the Alpine Massif still continues to push upwards. But where there is a mountain range, there will also be constant assaults by frost, wind, and water. If it weren't for erosion, the Alps would be 30 kilometers high by now. Every trickle carries the mountaintop down to the valley, pebble by pebble. The precursor to the Mediterranean once covered vast areas of the earth. It was from this early ocean that the Alps arose, creating a river that now flows through 6 European countries, the Rhine. Its story begins 50 million years ago. Its source is in Switzerland, high above sea level. On the descent, winding its way through valleys, the Rhine makes an enormous drop in altitude. The Alpine Rhine carries along with it sand and detritus, the rubble of the eroding mountain range. Several million tons of it each year. It's all deposited little by little in Lake Constance. The river is thus filling a depression left behind by Ice Age glaciers. Lake Constance itself was cut into the land by glacial ice stream tongues. When they retreated, they left behind the large meltwater lake surrounded by high walls of rocky rubble. When the dams burst, the Alpine Rhine made its way westwards to join the still young Upper Rhine. At the Rhine Falls near Schaffhausen, Switzerland, the second largest waterfall in Europe, up to 700 cubic meters of water a second come crashing down. For the river's fish, the upstream journey ends here, except for the eel. Its roots go back millions of years. From the evolutionary perspective, the eel is an old model, but one that is by no means outdated. It can leave its element to get past the Rhine Falls via the land route. It's thought that the reign of the dinosaurs came to an abrupt end 65 million years ago with a meteorite strike, but that wasn't really the end of their story. Its claws are only faintly reminiscent of the predatory dinosaurs of the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods. Yet the dipper is one of their living descendants. In fact, all birds are distant relations of speedy little predatory dinosaurs, some of which even wore feathers themselves. The gray wagtail is a deft little insect hunter, but its forebears will hardly have suddenly morphed into aerial acrobats from one generation to the next. As everything in the development of life, this transformation too was likely a process peppered with intermediate forms and transitions. Just past Schaffhausen, the Rhine flows on into Germany, along the edge of the Black Forest, woodlands famed far beyond the national borders. The shade of the mountain conifer is home turf for the wood grouse. The male is no flying ace, but he does boast impressive plumage. This shows the female that her suitor would be a healthy partner. The offspring of these animals will be a tiny bit different from their parents. Those who pass on their characteristics to the next generation will define conditions in their environment. The way of the world for 4 billion years now. It worked. The females are all aflutter now. Some members of the plant kingdom have also survived the Earth's major mass die-offs. The first conifers appeared way back in the Carbon Age coal forests. The silver fir is one of their ancestors. Up to 65 meters tall, they grow in the hilly regions of Central and Southern Europe. These trees are a living example of tricks that evolution has employed to great success since time immemorial. The generation of protected, nutrient-rich seeds and airworthy pollen, and all on one tree. The source of the Wutak River is in the south of the Black Forest. Over millions of years, the tireless power of the water has slowly exposed the rock strata. The river cuts through the history of Europe, right down to the foundation stone of the Carbon Age mountain range. The environment is ever-changing. The view from above the Black Forest down into the Rhine Valley is like a window on the Earth's interior. Here, a continent was divided. To the west, the Rheingraben, or trench, opened up as a branch of the ocean, cut across Germany. 50 million years ago, when southern Central Europe was pushed up by the pressure of the Alps, the ocean retreated, leaving behind the upper Rhine. The river chose an unsettled bed. The Earth's crust is especially thin here. Magma repeatedly made its way to the surface. Millennia of erosion have sanded down the prehistoric volcanic craters. What remains are the sun-drenched terraced slopes of the Kaiserstuhl, a little bit of Tuscany on the upper Rhine. The extinct volcanoes are a fertile ground for many life forms. A jungle of grasses and flowers provide good camouflage for an unusual hunter, the praying mantis. It's mating season, and the female is hungry. The lizard is completely unfazed by the deadly rendezvous. Unlike its ancestors, millions of years ago. This collision put an end to the age of the dinosaurs. crash hurled huge amounts of dust into the Earth's atmosphere. The sun was hidden for months on end. Temperatures dropped significantly. More than half of all species were wiped out. Scientific debate over whether the meteorite strike alone caused the dinosaurs' demise will most likely rage on and on. But one thing is certain: the time for the mammals had come. In the shadow of the dinosaurs, the first mammals appeared, little unassuming creatures. With the giant reptiles out of the picture, the way was now clear for them.